Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirant. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
All right, so on this episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, then I'm delighted to be welcoming André Martin. He is a growth-oriented talent management executive with well over 20 years of experience in talent development, executive team development, strategy development, employee engagement, organization development, culture change, C-suite assessment and succession planning, innovation and design thinking, and employee experience design. He's also a father, a husband, and a wildly curious learner who's dedicated to ensuring iconic brands become iconic companies. André, welcome.
Thanks, Claire. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure. Let's start, as we always do, with your career journey. You've been through several pivots and changes in your career, starting out in organization at Disney and Mars, culminating as a VP of People and Talent Development at Nike, Target, and then Google. You also then went to the consulting side, creating the CEO development and purpose practice at Accenture, and eventually founding your own practices, as well as writing a book called Wrong Fit, Right Fit, which came out in September this year. Tell us how this amazing career has unfolded and how much role design and serendipity have played. And if you wouldn't mind sharing your key moments of pride and the moments of challenge.
Claire, I always start my career with where I'm from. I grew up in a very small town in the Ozark Mountains in southern Missouri in the United States. And I was lucky enough to be raised by parents who were college professors, and they worked at a university their mission was to provide rural, impoverished youth with a free education. And so I grew up on a college campus. I grew up in education and seeing the power of education to change lives. And I think if I look back now, I'm like, that 8-year-old on that college campus knew exactly what he was going to go do in the world. And that was to really start using education to just make the world better. And that landed me in all those jobs you mentioned. I think about a few fundamental experiences. The first one for me was my first job in grad school. I worked for a place called Harshman and Associates. Carl Harshman ran a small change and culture firm. And when I was 26, I think, in grad school, he hired me as an intern, paid for my college, and said, you have the capacity to be a great practitioner, but if you stay in a program for 6 years, all you're going to come out with are these academic frameworks, all of these theories and ideas. And he's like, I want you to realize that the real world isn't a theory. It isn't a framework. It is about your capacity to meet people where they are. And so my first job with him, he sent me to LTV Steel in Cleveland to do team leader assessment for third shift line leaders. And I showed up in my coat and tie and my hard shoes. And I learned so many lessons in that about how to meet people where they are, about how to show up as the culture to help sort of change the culture. And it was one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned. He was an amazing mentor. That was a foundational experience that allowed me to go through school with this great balance of practice and theory. And then I went to Disney. I spent time with the guest experience team. Disney's a wonderful training ground for so many things, but more than anything, that guest experience. Really sort of getting in that sense of every single person in a company has the opportunity to change the experience of the customer or the guest. And so just being in that space and learning that foundation was another great experience that led me to being a design thinker and designing for the person that's going to use the program and the assets in the right way. Then I'd say the next really foundational experience, and there's a few of them that had a lot to do with my leaders. So I worked for a person named John Shepard at Mars. He brought me from the Center for Creative Leadership, which was just this great executive development firm. I'm 28. I'm in the center. I'm working with 50-year-old leaders thought leaders in leadership. And it was just that Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours of gaining experience and practice to become an expert. And then I met this guy named John Shepard. We were running a program for him. We ran our first program for Mars, and he said, hey, why don't you come here and do this for a family-oriented company that's principle-driven and help us continue to build on this foundation. And he was just the story of, he believed in me at a time that I probably had no business doing that job. I was far too green, far too young, far too not ready to do the kinds of things he was asking me to do. But it was his confidence that sort of allowed me to have that career. And it was probably one of the most phenomenal career experiences I've had. Working for a privately held, family-run company that's principle-driven, just the maturity of leadership was so humbling. And then I had these series of additional leaders and jobs all the way through. And Claire, without the answer going too long, I would say that when I look back at my career, it was almost all serendipity and being willing to leap and trust that the net's going to appear. I was sort of always really clear about what I wanted to do. I knew my cause. I knew I was a person of craft. I knew that in order to be good at this job, I needed to see a lot of different systems. And I knew just intuitively that who I worked for mattered much more than where I worked. And I just trusted those things all the way through my career. And they landed me in these amazing, cool, iconic, really interesting, hard jobs and companies over about 20 years.
I love the idea of the jumping without the net, but trusting it'll be there. If you had one lesson that you learned from one of those iconic leaders, which would you highlight?
I would say my second leader at Mars, Eileen Richards. I just saw her when I was back in London seeing my son. One of the things that I remember vividly with her is just this idea of trust the capability that you have in the seat. She was a leader that would come to me and say, hey, I have this problem I need to figure out. Tell me how you solve it. Instead of saying, I have this solution, I need you to implement it. She always came to every conversation, not just with me, but with her team saying, I know the problem. And I trust that in this group, we have the capability and the thought power to be able to find the best idea. And she worked every day to be able to do that. She almost never gave us direction, but she always provided us the left and right boundary. And then she just said, go, do your best work, be your best self, put your best thinking forward for the company. And I think in that, a couple of things happened, right, Claire? The first one is she magically oriented our identity always to the company first and then to ourselves last. The generosity of space pushed on us in a really strange way, this utter responsibility to do what was right by the company. Because you weren't fighting for time or space or resources. You were sort of in a place where, man, I need to put my best work to solve this really big question that Aileen believes is going to help the company out. And that was just a really great way to get everyone to order their hierarchy of identity in the right way. And I think the second lesson I learned from her is leadership is not about how much space you take up. It's actually about how much space you create. And she was just phenomenal in doing that.
Beautiful. Thank you. So let's move swiftly on and think about the transitions that you've made from types of context. You know, you've gone from being a corporate employee to a consultant, first in a big firm and then on your own. And of course, you've become an author along the way. Those are big disruptive changes, but challenges too. How's it been as a journey?
It's been really good, right? I would say that, hey, I've always fundamentally believed that careers are about analogous experiences as opposed to directionally up and through or towards a goal. And now I've lived that, and it's been such a gift. I've found edges I wouldn't have otherwise found. And it's going to sound weird, but I met parts of me I probably would have never met. And I just found that the skill set now, as I look back, is so much more well-rounded. Having done that, I think on the shadow side, I always worry about job hopping and transitions. Now, I moved a lot of jobs. And one of the things that's been a real lesson of experience from that is there are powerful lessons to be learned. But there's also a lot of unseen cost. Think about every transition you make from one company to another. You set your network almost back to zero. You lose almost all of your reputational capital. You have to learn a whole new language, a whole new way of working, how people set strategy, collaborate, manage conflict, how they give feedback, how they develop. And when you're doing that, you have to remember that you only have so much creative energy, and it's always flowing. But in those moments of transition, it's flowing to rebuilding those things and not to your craft. So there were moments where I made these transitions, and I look back now and I'm like, in those years where I was in those transitions, they were big. And almost all my creative energy went to those transitions. And in retrospect, I probably lost some ability to become better at my craft. And I picked up other things, but my craft sort of sat dormant during those moments. I was doing the things I knew how to do as opposed to pushing myself to do new things. And that's what I love about this chapter right now is I'm learning new stuff every day. Writing that book and being in sort of this independent space, I'm back to my craft. I'm doing what I love. I'm learning, and I'm ready to write a second book just because I've never felt smarter, not since my first 5 years of my career.
That's beautiful. I love that. And I'm thinking also that you're probably being a little overly modest in suggesting that because your energy is flowing into adaptation and growth into the new role, that you're sort of not learning. I suspect what you are learning is what we tend to think of as career agility. You know, you're learning the art of transitioning from one place to another. You're learning the right way to bound and rebound. It's just a different set of skills from those that are involved in, as you say, practicing your specific craft.
And Claire, I love this, right? Because here's the thing that stands out for me is if our creative energy is always flowing, I think the one thing that might be happening to us is we don't actually know always what it's flowing to. And as a result, we're not paying attention to the places where we're taking key events that happen to us, transitions, and we're actually changing them into lessons of experience. Without that awareness, you might just see that as logistical coordination things you have to do to get ready to perform. When in fact, to your point, you are picking up brilliant and beautiful skills that are transferable and applicable, but only if you can see them as not related to this particular context, and you can mine them to make that a system that will work for you in the future. I don't think we do that all the time.
No, I don't think we see it as individuals on our career paths. And I think that a sadly very small number still of organizations and leaders see that set of skills as something to be valued when hiring and developing people. So we've got a lot of work to do still to make that more valuable.
Yes, we do. No matter how many great training programs or courses or things we do, one of the biggest uber lessons I've had is that life is the greatest classroom on earth. I mean, we don't need to take many more classes. You really just need to go outside your door, and you've got so much that you can learn from and grow into if you have the ability to sort of take 3 steps back, open your eyes really wide, sit in the moment, and think about what am I taking away from this thing that can help me in the next thing I face. And again, just in this age of distraction and social media and all those things, I worry that our ability to be that reflective is just getting lost, which makes me kind of sad.
Let's not be too sad. Let's talk about happy things. Your book, Right Fit, which has just been published. It's being very successful. What was your motivation to write it? What particular need are you trying to address? And what was your particular process for the writing?
Like anything in life, I think this was a journey that I didn't expect. So first off, they sort of asked me, they said, hey, we'd love to have a book in our portfolio around culture in this new age of work. How in this new age of work are you going to build a really strong, vibrant culture? And I'm like, oh my God, that sounds awesome. I'm totally in. And then I did what every researcher does, right? I went out there and said, okay, great question, really big. What's going to be my point of view? And as I started talking to ex-leaders I worked with or worked for, going out to thought leaders and peers that I know, I started to have a realization, Claire. It was this in very simple words. I started to go, you know what? Although there are a lot of insights around what makes a great culture in this new age of work, it was very different for a lot of people. That is, no one is really pointing to it's these 5 best practices, these 6 things, it's these principles. And then I started to think about in that my own experience in the workplaces, and Mars was very different than Nike, was very different than Google, was very different than Target, very different than Accenture, and different not in the values that we espouse. Those are kind of similar. Very different in the way that we got work done day to day, how we socialized ideas, set strategy, managed conflict, kicked off teams, gave feedback. Those things were radically different. And so then I started thinking, what if it's not about good or bad culture, about toxic or engaging environments? What if it's really about whether or not the way that I like to work fits the way the company does work? And that kicked off this super fun interview process, over 100 interviews. I just asked 2 simple questions. Tell me about a time when you had an authentic and deep alignment to the way a company worked every day. Then tell me about a time when that wasn't true. And the cool thing, Claire, is everybody has those stories. Everybody. And as they tell those stories, they both become more and more colorful and more cathartic. And so that really is where it kicked off. I'd say in the lesson of writing, a couple things really stand out for me. Is I said it earlier, I'll say it again and again. The process of writing, whether you never publish a book, it inherently makes you smarter. It gives you depth. It forces you to go below the easy answers and search for some kind of truth that can help other people. I think the second thing was in the interviews, and I did those over the course of almost writing the entire book. I kept doing the interviews. I still do them today. Is those wrong fit experiences, those places where it just feels like everybody has a secret decoder ring to success except for you. Like you're slogging through mud, like works harder than it should be. They were so poignant, so visceral in the emotion that people were feeling that I couldn't wait to get a book out there that might help someone in the future not have to go through that same experience as many times as some of the great talent I talked to had to go through it. So that was really the motivation. The cause is I just want everyone to find a place where they can do their best work. And hopefully someday, if I had to say, what's the 20-year vision? I want every company in the world to be able to say, come to work here and you'll walk out healthier.
That would be quite something.
I think it's possible. I'm an optimist. Like I am one of the biggest optimists in the world. I will fully admit that. But I really think with all the tools we have, with all the knowledge we have, I believe that's coming for us. Some company pretty soon here is going to be able to claim that. And when they do, it's going to radically change the way we think about performance.
Amazing. We definitely need to do more talking and do more working towards making that happen. Let's, in the meantime, get into the meat of the book. Marshall Goldsmith, who very generously and beautifully endorsed the book, calls it the ultimate guide for finding a fulfilling and satisfying career that aligns with your values, passions, company culture, and skills. If you were to boil down the main ideas of the book, obviously we want our listeners to go and buy it, but we also want to bring them in with some sense of what it's really about. What would these main ideas be?
The first main idea is that when we start looking for jobs, there's a lot of things that are in our way of us making a decision that's right for us right now. The first one is we don't know ourselves well enough.
Oh, yeah.
We start our job searches by looking for a job, and as soon as we push open that first job advertisement, we're in a giant marketing machine filled with bells and whistles and bright and shiny things and aspiration and poetry. And it plays to the worst parts of our cognitive makeup as human beings, because we are almost always and every day sort of playing against a part of our brains that gets in our way of making great decisions. That's confirmation bias. If we have a decision we want to make and we place that decision inside this big circle of truth that's available to us, we're only going to see a small percent of the information that aligns to the decision that we want to be true. So when I talk to a lot of the interviewees, I ask them, I'm like, hey, you landed in this wrong fit experience. When did you know? And they all chuckled and said, I knew in the interview. And I ignored all the signs because I wanted the bigger title, the better paycheck, work for the cooler brand, all these things that we know aren't aligned to job satisfaction over time. So the first lesson is you have to know yourself. You have to know what you value in big decisions. You have to know who you work best for. You have to know the ways that you work. You have to know what you're solving for right now. You have to know the life you want to have in 10 years. And if you don't do that work before you ever look at a job advertisement, you're going to lose yourself. I think the second big lesson is interviewing is like a first date. Everybody shows up in their best clothes with their pithiest answers. Companies show up with these amazing career sites, and we are the best place to work. Look at all the lists that we have. And I think the truth is that interview process isn't set up for us to find out anything real about each other. And so what tends to happen is we have this company we see in the interviewing. We then get there on the first day, and the version we see in onboarding is a little bit different. Still really cool leaders, the best products, the best systems. And then we take day 2 and we're in our actual office with our actual team, with our actual manager that we're actually going to be working with. And it feels like we just landed on Mars. And that discrepancy between what we talk about and see in hiring versus what we actually experience in the day-to-day, the gap's just too big. Too many people lose engagement in those first few weeks because of a mismatch of expectations. Big lesson there. I think the third lesson is there's a lot of things that the back end of the book was written for leaders who are creating companies. And there's a number of things that we can do to rethink tried and true ways that we design our companies that allow people first to know us better and then design ways for them to stay engaged, because I'm looking at numbers and talent that scare me, Claire. 1 in 3 new joiners are leaving in the first 90 days. 52% of people who are there at 6 months after joining are still looking for a new job. $8.8 trillion of lost productivity due to disengagement. I mean, something's really wrong at work. And part of it is we're just not creating the kind of experience that can buffer against all the greener grass that we see on social media. Everyone's infinitely browsing. Everyone's looking out there in the world. Everyone's seeing somebody who looks like them, has the same experience as them, has the same job as them. And there's one big difference is there actually looks like they're having more fun, that they work at a better company. And so in that, we're just losing our commitment to the places that we're in the search for something better. And in my interviews, I think what I found is better may not be out there because there's just no perfect fit. So if you're in a place where you're comfortable, you might want to stay put.
It's a tough reality, isn't it? But if we don't confront it, then we continue to have unhappy people and bad statistics.
We do.
So let's get deeper into that, because in the end, what we're really saying is corporate culture is whatever it is, wherever it is, but it is how it is thanks to the leadership of the company. However much you dress it up in a first date, it ends up being whatever it is, black, white, green, blue, soft, hard, whatever. But if we don't have fit, then it doesn't work. So I recently wrote a piece about the fact that culture is communicated by how we gather, not what we say. Gathering is everything. Especially now, we come together to swap stories, strengthen relationships, learn from one another, and remind ourselves of what matters most. We come together to know we're not alone. And in this age of remote and hybrid working, why we gather and how we gather has shifted dramatically. Can you share a little bit more about this idea, please?
One of the questions I often get is just this question around, like, it's clear that culture isn't just the things that we say we value. It's actually how we do work every day, right? How we set strategy, manage conflict, collaborate, socialize ideas, all those things I talked about. And a lot of questions I get from leaders is, so how do I make that more consistent, more well-known, and more overt? And one of the things that stands out for me is, hey, no matter where you work, you probably are hybrid in some degree.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I don't know many people that aren't spending a couple days a week now at home in white collar jobs, at least. A lot of service industries need you to come in every day, right? And all the blessings to them for doing those jobs. We need you all out there. But what I'm looking at is just this idea of, for a long time, we could use gatherings to give people new information. How many times have you and I gone to a conference that literally you go there, you sit in a seat, and you're just taking on information for 8 straight hours? In my corporate jobs, it was, here's our new strategy, here's our new approach, here's the new initiatives we'll be doing, all those kinds of things. And now as I look at the new world, the gathering that we do, the spaces we create, there's a couple fundamental shifts that we have to start accounting for. The first one is, that is our moment to build real trust and real depth of relationship. Because once we leave there, we're out on these videos that you and I are on today, they're sort of two-dimensional. We use social capital because they're very transactional. We're trying to get on and off as fast as we can. And if you and I don't have a really good, trusted relationship, I got to tell you, it's 50-50 pick 'em whether you turn off the video, and no matter what we talked about we were going to do together, you may or may not do it. You're going to do it if you and I have this trusted, well-situated relationship. And so I tell people, I'm like, hey, when you have agendas now, when you gather, you should probably have 60% of the time that's wide open, or at least built to drive depth of conversation and trust as opposed to content. That's a big switch for corporate America. I think the second thing that's important in those moments is, it used to be that if I hired you, Claire, I brought you in, I onboarded you, I told you what your job is, I could pretty much leave you alone for 20 years. I didn't have to re-recruit you again. Once you were there, you were there. I mean, my parents grew up in that golden watch era, right? If you stay, you retire from the place you started. Now, that just isn't the case. Everybody has their heads up. So the job of leadership just got hard. Not only do you have to recruit people and get them in, you have to re-recruit them at every opportunity you have, every touch point, every moment. And it's sort of 4 basic questions. First one is, you have to remind them why the world is better with this company in it. You have to tell them how this company makes money or has impact and why their job is meaningful. Because a lot of people don't feel that today. Third is, you have to tell them how we do work, right? How do we do work here? And lastly, you have to sort of remind them of the unwavering promise we make to you as an employee for the hard work that you do. This is why coming to this company is good for you. And I just don't know that leaders are seeing the spaces they create as the opportunity to re-recruit. And I think that is just a fundamental in the new age of work that we're living in.
If it's possible either to name or at least describe, you say you don't see many companies doing this sort of re-recruitment approach, which I totally agree is completely crucial. Are there any that you could quote as having made decent progress in that respect?
I could take the ones that have just even recently been the news and these interesting stories. I think it was Slack that went offline for a week, I believe, to go and do learning together.
Wow.
Right? They literally, I think they shut the doors and said for a week, we're going to go and get better at our jobs together. There was a story about Smucker's, the jelly company in the United States. Instead of saying we're going to do a 2, 3, 4, 5 sort of run on when people have to come in, they said there's 16 weeks in the year. In those 16 weeks, everybody's coming in the office. Everybody's going to be here. And those are our moments when we are going to collectively come together. And what's funny, Claire, is I worked at Mars, it's got to be 15, maybe 16 years ago. And here's what I will tell you is, before all of this went down, before there was ever talk of all this remote working or anything, Mars had a headquarters that was 150 people in McLean, Virginia. And 2 weeks every quarter, the top 150, 200 leaders would fly to that office, and we would work together day in and day night, setting all the agendas, getting all the projects kicked off, doing all our reviews, and then we bounce back out around the world. And so there are companies that have been doing this a long time.
Yes.
They've never made a fuss about it. It's just that they said, this is the way we do work because we believe it's the best way to do it. And that, more than anything, is the lesson is, I don't think there's a better way to build a company. I don't think there's a single way to do your best work. The best way is the way that's most natural for your company.
Yes.
And the hardest thing in the world is hanging on to that as you grow. Because every time we bring in a leader, you know what we bring? Great technical skill, new insight, potentially innovative solutions, and all of their cultural baggage. And because we don't do a good job on bringing them into our system, they bring all those work practices with them. And so we become this big, messy hairball of every individual's best practice of how they like to get work done. And that makes work really hard.
It does. Well, I join you in your desire to make work not just less hard, but better and more enjoyable. Let's look forward. What's coming up for you next year? You mentioned the allure of a second book. What are the most exciting projects that you've got planned for next year?
I feel really filled with a lot of gratitude right now for the kinds of things I'm getting to work on. I have a company who, it was funny, really reached out over some of the posts on LinkedIn, and they want to take a swing at learning how to build sort of what I would call an energy restoring company, a place where you might be able to come and work and walk out healthier. So I'm super excited about that project. We'll start off with just a real sort of exploration session to kind of look at analogous cases and edge cases and try to understand where could we sort of take a run at building a better company. That's an exciting project. I've got a couple of really interesting culture projects. So by culture, what I mean is they're realizing that as they've grown, they've lost the essence of who they are, how they worked and how they did things when they were 10 people in a little garage or office somewhere. And it was natural and it was fun and it was easy. And you know, my analogy in the book, Claire, is that when you're in a right fit experience, it feels like every day you walk in the office, you're writing with your dominant hand. When you're not, it feels like you're writing with your non-dominant hand. It's slow, it's hard, it's frustrating, your quality goes down. And these companies are realizing they've grown really quick. And in that growth, they've lost themselves. And so they're trying to say, hey, how can I do two things? How can I take a step back and really sort of get clear about how we work at our best every day? And then how do I help people to learn how to do that? And so that's some exciting projects that are on the horizon. And then, yeah, just starting to think about maybe that second book and what that could be and what that might look like.
That's fantastic. André, I feel we could probably talk for a lot longer, but we're going to stop now at this point. And I'm going to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's been a fascinating conversation. I know the listeners are going to love it. And I fully expect that we'll be getting you back over the next year to tell us how some of these amazing culture building, health building, wellness building projects are going.
I appreciate you, Claire. Thanks for having me on today. And I wish you and yours a happy holiday.
Thank you so much. And to you.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.